Hi. Is the Sean Combs verdict a shocking, surprising victory for Sean Combs? Well, it certainly might lead you to think that if you listen to some of the mainstream media reaction. Take a listen here.
As we've been saying, they're certainly not the most significant, serious charges that he was facing.
Yeah.
But they're not nothing.
They're not nothing, but they're not much either. I mean, in the scheme of this case, the 3 counts where Sean Combs was found not guilty, the racketeering and the 2 forcible sex trafficking counts, those were existential threats. I mean, if Sean Combs had been convicted of either of them, he may well have spent the rest of his life behind bars. He definitely, automatically would have spent at least 15 years behind bars. There's no way to spin this other than a massive victory for Sean Combs and a massive setback for the Southern District of New York. It's a good reminder. Juries surprise us all the time. Juries can be discerning. They went count by count here. They didn't just sort of sweep the table and say all guilty, all not guilty. They made very fine distinctions between mere interstate prostitution, which they found him guilty of, and on the other hand, forcible sex trafficking, which they found him not guilty of. So Kara just said Sean Combs' legal team was exulting and celebrating. They deserve it. They pulled out a miraculous outcome for their client.
But is it really a victory for Combs? Is it really a shock, for that matter? I'm Shan Wu. I'm a former sex crimes prosecutor, in addition to the other types of more traditional federal work that I did. And I secured the first life without parole sentence for a serial rapist in D.C. I'm going to bring that perspective to you as we break down this particular story and look behind the scenes as to what really goes into a prosecution of this nature and what was going on here in terms of strategy. Now, before we jump into that, let's do a reminder to you to subscribe to our channel, make us the best, the biggest, and let us hear from you about what you want covered and what you want to see in our coverage. So going back to that video clip, I think Dana Bash has the best of that point because she's asking my colleague Ellie Honig what his opinion is, and she has it right. Dana says it's not nothing. It's 2 criminal convictions, and Ellie's comments that it's kind of not very important or not much in the big scheme of things. It lacks some context, which we're going to go into, and maybe, shows some lack of insight there. So the charges that Combs was acquitted of, the RICO and the sex trafficking charges, they certainly were the ones that carried the heaviest potential penalty with mandatory minimums. Now, I'm not going to do the real technical elements of this. I'm going to talk more about how these sorts of cases work in prosecutions and what the jury may be thinking. So these 2 charges, RICO and the trafficking, are actually very similar in a sense in this case. Not so much the technical elements of them, but because they both require a jury to believe, and I use that word very deliberately because while it is all about the evidence, a jury convicts on what it believes. So they would have had to believe in this case that the conduct of Combs was part of an organized plan, a scheme to keep doing something, to even profit off of it, versus a one-off event or a series of one-off events. One-off events like paying for illegal sex, transporting sex workers for that illegal purpose. Those could be a series of one-off events, even if they occurred more than once, without being part of a more organized plan or scheme to traffic, and also for RICO, which is the racketeering organized crime, you have to show there's a criminal enterprise. And again, as many people pointed out, it's not an enterprise like you have to incorporate it as Murder Inc. and tell everyone you're doing crimes, but it has to be a organization. There has to be some structure to it. There's got to be a conspiracy. This is a process by which they're doing this thing for a criminal purpose. Again, different than one-off individual crimes. So to prove the RICO and the trafficking, the prosecutors, the federal prosecutors here, chose not to put on certain kinds of witnesses to make that part of the case. Like they didn't put on for live testimony, I think the head of Combs' security team, they had text evidence from it. Now, maybe they were worried that those folks were still loyal to Combs. They might have been hostile witnesses. But maybe, this really struck me, maybe they thought that the testimony and evidence of the violence and callous behavior of Combs would carry the day. For example, there's that horrible tape of him beating Cassie Ventura, the surveillance tape. If that was the calculation, then it was wrong. They should have put on the tough witnesses. You want to show the jury everything and tell them ahead of time if there's going to be weaknesses to the case, difficult witnesses that need to be explained, to meticulously build the case for the trafficking and the racketeering. The violence, the tape, still would have spoken for itself. They have to be careful not to rely too much on the violence for a couple reasons. If you rely too much on it, like if you just rail on that all the time, you run the chance that on appeal, a court of appeals might say that, oh, you were using that for too much of a prejudicial effect, too much prejudice versus the probative value of it. So that's one reason they got to be careful. The other reason, kind of more subtle here, goes to the dynamics of the jury. The jury wants to see the prosecution really put together a very meticulous, step-by-step building of a case. If you don't give them that, there can be a problem. That may have been what happened here, where they felt, oh my goodness, this is so powerful, the evidence of the violence, the testimony, the tape, that's really going to carry the day here. Now, the defense had a very narrow path, and they stuck to it, which was they wanted to admit the violence, but attack the charges that would have subjected Combs to the very harsh punishment. And that was the trafficking and the RICO charge. So what they did was they admitted the violence, right? They're not arguing about that. But they wanted to attack the idea that there was more organization, more structure here. This was part of more of an ongoing pattern. Now take a listen to the Combs defense team for a moment, feeling quite giddy from having avoided the rest of the charges for their client. Here you go.
Thank you all for being patient. Am I speaking loud enough? You all can hear me okay? All right. Today's a great victory. It's a great victory for Sean Combs. It's a great victory for the jury system. You saw that the Southern District of New York prosecutors came at him with all that they had. They're not stopping, but one thing stands between all of us and a prison, and that is a jury of 12 citizens. And we had a wonderful jury. They listened to every word, and they got the situation right, or certainly right enough. They acquitted him of the sex trafficking, which he was absolutely innocent of. They acquitted him of the racketeering conspiracy that he was absolutely innocent of, and all of the components to it. The kidnapping, he was innocent of that. The arson, he was innocent of that. The obstructing justice, he was innocent of that. And that is no longer just me saying that. That is the verdict of our jury. So today is a great day. Today is a win. Today is a victory of all victories for Sean Combs and our legal team.
Okay, that's Mark Agnafilo, maybe your last name is familiar to you, who did a great job, as did his team. But let me clarify a couple of things that he said that likely in the heat of the moment that, not quite technically correct. So first of all, innocent, right? No, he's not innocent. Combs, like any other defendant who gets acquitted, he was acquitted. It's not a finding of innocence, right? That's a big misconception lots of folks have, which is the jury found him innocent. The jury doesn't find anybody innocent ever. They only find people guilty or not guilty. So he was found not guilty of those two charges. Now, why does the jury do that? It can be for evidence reasons. They might have found the evidence just wasn't strong enough. Credibility of witnesses, that's also evidence, maybe not enough. Forensics didn't make it beyond the reasonable doubt standard. Or they may even be engaged in what we call jury nullification, meaning they just don't want to convict in a case like this. And the thing is, they don't have to tell us. They don't have to say why they found him not guilty. I mean, jurors might speak to the press and stuff, but it's not like they have to explain in writing unanimously why they did something. They just vote to convict or not to convict. Second point, he's saying that it's a great victory. Well, it's no question that it is a victory for the defense team to avoid those harsh charges. For them, I mean, the mandatory minimum penalties for a man his age is close to 60 would have effectively been a life sentence for him. So you got to give credit to where credit is due. They saved their client from the most severe charges. Now, something to think about here in terms of how the case stacked up is the difference between the defense team lawyers versus the prosecution team. So the defense team here has a lot of state criminal, violent crime, sexual crime experience versus purely federal experience. And that's a little bit different. In state cases, the state does the primary amount of violent crimes. Bank robberies, assaults, murders, that tends to all be state. It's not going to be a federal hook in that. So most federal prosecutors don't have that kind of rough and tumble experience, the day in, day out, walking into the court with dozens, sometimes hundreds of cases that you're dealing with in that violent crime scenario. A little bit stereotypical, some of them have it, but the idea is that federal prosecutors build complex, meticulous cases rather than that sort of rough and tumble experience. And they can do a great job at that. This was a complex case. There's a lot to pull together. But the defense team had a lot of that sort of street crime, defending sexual assault experience. So, for example, take a look just at Mark's example here. He is a former federal prosecutor, but he also worked in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, which is the street crime aspect more than the federal office. And notably, he also represents right now defendant Luigi Mangione, who's accused of murdering United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. Very high-profile cases. Someone else in the defense team was the daughter of Mark Garagos. She also has extensive defense experience with defending sexual assault charges. The feds don't do that kind of volume work in sexual assaults. They may bring trafficking cases, but that individual kind of nitty-gritty of accusing somebody of assaulting someone sexually, they don't have that kind of volume experience in that, or even most violent crimes, because again, the bulk of those crimes are done at the state level. My own office in DC, when I was a federal prosecutor, was an exception. DC is a federal enclave, so we did all the street crime as well as traditional cases. One reason why I chose it, actually, was I wanted that kind of experience. So we'll put up for you some bios about the defense counsel for you to look at, because what's interesting here is it's much harder to find biographies or background of prosecutors than it is for the defense counsel. Defense lawyers get known for their high-profile cases and clients. They get associated with that, not so much the prosecutor, and that represents a couple of things, including the kind of notion that prosecutors are bringing cases on behalf of all the people versus representing anyone in particular. But it also factors in that there's sort of a culture of notoriety, right? Notorious defendants, well-known ones that have star power, that captivates the public, and that rubs off on the defense counsel too when they have very famous clients, and maybe that can rub off on the jury verdict as well. One of the prosecutors here, a little bit better known because of her name, Maureen Comey, daughter of the former FBI director James Comey, we'll put up a little bit of bio information against her. She has some interesting high-profile cases. Most prosecutors do. And she originally, one of the cases she handled was of the Maxwell case, Epstein's cohort there, and she got the conviction there. But notice in her biography, she rose through the ranks at the federal prosecutor's office, the Southern District of New York, doing violent and organized crime, focusing on embezzlement, drugs, weapons, crimes. Very good experience for bringing the RICO charge, but of course, not necessarily day in and day out doing sexual violence, sexual type crimes. So that's just something to notice about what the dynamic is here when you look at, how the case plays out. Does it win or lose in terms of which side has the better of it? Now, what lessons can we learn from this verdict? I mean, some Combs supporters obviously take this as he was innocent. He wasn't. He was acquitted and found guilty of certain charges. And some will say that DOJ overreached and blew the case. That's what I do want to address, which is, remember, they have recently used RICO successfully against R. Kelly and secured a victory there as well as in other cases. That's becoming a more common use of the RICO is in these sorts of large sexual misconduct, sexual trafficking type charges. Now, I'll put up some comments here for you to look at from some advocates who are saying that this could have a very bad effect on future sex trafficking prosecutions. For example, one person says that it could really cause DOJ to think long and hard before bringing similar sex trafficking charges. And for victim advocates, they're very disappointed about this. And the concern is here will this have a chilling effect on prosecutors who will be reluctant to bring these kinds of charges? And that's where I want to take some exception to Ellie Honig's comments that these convictions, the prostitution cases, transporting for prostitution, was not that big of a deal in the big scheme of things, because they are a really big deal in the big scheme of things. They're a big deal because of Combs's power and his fame, and the investigation itself and prosecution are a really big deal because it's helping to change that power dynamic. It's chipping away at the invulnerability of the rich and powerful. That's what DOJ should take away from this. Do more of these cases, maybe get better at them, maybe have more experience, but most importantly, and I give them great kudos for this, don't be afraid to try hard cases. If you try cases, some you will win, some you will lose. There's a reason why the government has such a high conviction rate, particularly on the federal cases. One, they take a lot more time to make the case, but two, they're very selective. They're a little bit, well, not a little bit, a whole lot risk averse. They don't want to try a case that looks kind of weak to them. Some of that's human nature. That's something you have to fight against. You don't want prosecutors to be risk averse. You want them to make sure they have strong evidence for their cases, but just because it's a hard case, just because the defendant is someone who's really popular and will be hard to convince the jury to believe that they should be convicted, that hardly means you shouldn't take the case. And you see some of that risk-averse problem, perhaps, in some of the Merrick Garland DOJ's treatment of Trump and those who supported him. And you can see what that potential downside is when you're too risk-averse that way. So that's it for now. Keep those replies and comments coming. It's really good to hear from you and really helpful in thinking about the types of issues to cover and how we cover them. Talk to you soon.
I'm Michael Popak, and I got some big news for our audience. Most of you know me as the co-founder of Midas Touch's Legal AF and the Legal AF YouTube channel, or as a 35-year national trial lawyer. Now, building on what we started together on Legal AF, I've launched a new law firm, the Popak Firm, dedicated to obtaining justice through compassionate and zealous legal representation. At the Popak Firm, we are focused on obtaining justice for those who have been injured or damaged by a life-altering event by securing the highest dollar recoveries. I've been tirelessly fighting for justice for the last 35 years, so my own law firm organically building on my Legal AF work just feels right. And I've handpicked a team of top-tier trial fighters and settlement experts throughout all 50 states known as big auto injury attorneys who have the know-how to beat heartless insurance companies, corporations, government entities, and their attorneys. Big Auto's attorneys working with my firm are rock stars in their respective states and collectively responsible for billions of dollars in recoveries. So if you or a loved one have been on the wrong side of a catastrophic auto, motor vehicle, rideshare, or truck accident, suffered a personal injury, or been the victim of medical malpractice, employment harassment or discrimination, or suffered a violation of your civil and constitutional rights, then contact the Popak Firm today at 1-877-POPAK-AF or by visiting my website at www.thepopakfirm.com and fill out a free case evaluation form. And if we determine that you have a case and you sign with us, we don't get paid unless you do. The Popak Firm, fighting for your justice every step of the way.